What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video and welcome to my Platinum Trophy review of Darksiders Warmastered. In this series I take a look at a game, I tell you my thoughts, my opinions on the game, the pros, the cons, and I then look at the trophy list of the game. I tell you how I found earning the Platinum Trophy, the difficulty of the game, the completion time and how many playthroughs are required, as well as some missable trophies if the game has it. Now, it's worth mentioning before we begin, I love this game. I really did enjoy this game. And if you like games like me, you like RPGs, you like action, hack and slash, great combo based games, you probably will enjoy this game a lot. But without further ado, let's start with the video. So it's worth saying Darksiders Warmastered is a remaster of Darksiders on the PlayStation 3, which came out in 2010 by THQ Nordic. What exactly is this game? In this game you play as War, who is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and pretty much D-Day happens, the world ends, Apocalypse Day happens, and there's this massive battle between heaven and hell, and only one of the horsemen is summoned, in which being War. The game is pretty much about post 100 years of the downfall of humanity and about how War is trying to avenge himself and find out what truly happened on that day. I don't want to say any more because it takes you on quite a long, good story. It's a pretty great story. This game has a lot of biblical themes throughout to do with the apocalypse, which sounds a bit like it could be off-putting, but I assure you that is not the case. The story is pretty good. It stands by itself, but it also complements the game really well. Now I want to talk about sound, voice acting and audio next, because I usually do not have a lot to say on this element of a game, because usually most video games I've played recently have been quite forgettable in terms of maybe soundtracks. I just want to say that this game has one of the best soundtracks of a game I have played in such a long time. In fact, it's such a good soundtrack. I've actually downloaded the soundtrack on Spotify. The introduction theme is amazing. The music that in the game throughout is just really stellar. And on top of that as well, the voice acting is strong. It's quite generic a lot of the time, but that's because the protagonist War is quite a monotone character, and there's only a few humanoid characters actually in this game, and the rest are monsters, and they're voiced as monsters would be, so that's good enough. And then as well, Mark Hamill is in fact in this game. He plays your sort of captive companion, which is, it explains more if you play the game. He does follow you around, and if you like Mark Hamill's version of the Joker, you like that sort of voice acting, then you will enjoy him in this game, because that's pretty much what he does. But it's good acting from him, and it does add a little bit more quality to the game, but on a whole, the music and the voice acting is great. Okay, so now we've got graphics. Now it's worth saying that Darksiders is really a AA title, it's not really a AAA title. So if you look at like Darksiders 2 and Darksiders 3, for the times that they come out, the graphics just isn't up to par. Darksiders Warmastered is Darksiders running at 1080p. It looks pretty clear, it looks pretty good. Because it's a little bit cartoony, it holds up a lot better than a game that maybe wasn't so. And I enjoyed it. I thought the graphics was good enough. It's worth mentioning, for some reason when I captured this footage using the PS4 capture, that it didn't really capture 30 FPS a lot of the time. Thankfully I've got a capture card, so going forward for future videos I'll be able to capture at 30 to 60 FPS depending on the game. But I don't think this video is actually going to do the graphics and the FPS much justice, because I think actually it looks a lot better on the actual consoles than it does when you try and capture it. But on a whole, it's a pretty sound graphics and it's pretty smooth, so you are going to enjoy it. There's nothing really to nitpick. But on a positive, I didn't experience any frame drops at all, and throughout the majority of the game, in fact all of the game, it was very fluid and smooth, which is what you want in a game, especially in a remaster, because that's pretty much the thing that should be bringing the most to the game. Okay, next we've got the combat, and I have to say I really enjoyed the combat. To start with, it's a little bit unusual because there's quite a big delay to combat, which you have to get used to, and I'm talking it is noticeable. So when you hit the strike attack, which is square usually, or triangle, there's that millisecond delay, and it kind of can be quite off-putting to start with, but you do get the hang of it after an hour or so, and once you get through that, it's actually a really rewarding, in-depth combat system. So you have your light attack or general use attack with the sword from the square, and the triangle is your secondary weapon, which pretty much is either the scythe or this power fist. As you progress through the game, you unlock even more secondary weapons such as grapple hooks, pistols, throwing shuriken, and they're all good additions to the combat, but realistically you do most of your fighting with the sword because it is the best weapon. And that's probably the only issue, or one of the issues with the combat, is the fact that the sword is so much better than all of the secondary weapons, and the combat and the upgrades you get for combat are predominantly with the sword, and what it offers is actually a really in-depth, complicated, complex RPG leveling up system, which I really enjoyed. It had that little bit of Dark Souls-esque where you actually earn souls, which you then spend at stores, so the more you earn, the more you can buy, and you're rewarded from combat, not from anything else. I really enjoyed the combat. I found it very free-flowing and very fun. Now, it's worth mentioning, to get the trophies, which I will mention a little bit later on, you have to play the game on the hardest difficulty, and on that I would like to say I found the first couple of hours a little bit difficult. I'd probably say the first couple of hours when you're very underpowered, you've only got a couple of combos, maybe no secondary weapons, you can struggle with the bigger crowds. But after maybe 3 or 4 hours, I found it a little bit easier. But then again, I enjoyed it because it was more risk and reward. So it was like, do you want to fight these enemies or do you want to move straight past them? Because unlike a lot of other games of the time, it doesn't make you fight every single enemy. You can move past a lot of enemies. So in the early stages of the game, I found myself deciding whether or not I wanted to take the risk to fight an enemy or if I wanted to move past them. That being said, by about hour 8 or 9, I pretty much mastered the combat to the point where it wasn't too difficult anymore. Basically what happens is, as the game gets harder, they just make the enemies have more health and do more damage, as most games do, but they don't introduce that many more enemy types. So after maybe, there's probably only 5 or 6 enemy types, and after that, kind of limits out. So once you get like, say, 10-12 hours, you pretty much mastered the combat and you can pretty much beat everybody in any single fight. Now, there's a really cool sort of like Chaos 4 mode. So when you press L1 and R2, I believe, you turn this massive red Balrog-esque character like Lord of the Rings, and it's really fun and it's really OP. Because you only get it for maybe 10 seconds, it's just a good little breather to have it stored up in case you're really fighting the odds. You just turn it on and you can just clear the screen in pretty much 10 seconds. It's really good fun, I really liked it. My only thing would have been, when you turn into this Balrog-esque Chaos form, you only get a 3-hit combo and that's it. You get no range, no dashes or anything like that. But on a whole, I really enjoyed the combat, and I found the combat upgrades and the amount of complexity in the sword combat alone was really rewarding. It's just a shame that other elements, such as the scythe and the power glove, whatever it was called, it was very forgettable, let's be honest. They just didn't have the same sort of complexity and depth in their combat trees, which was a bit of a shame, but what was there for the sword was really impressive. This is a sort of old school RPG, guys. I really enjoyed this style, and it's a shame that we've sort of lost this style of RPG combat in the way you upgrade. I just felt like there was so much on offer for this game, which is 11 years old at this point, that I haven't played a modern RPG that can really compare to this level of complexity and rewarding combat. Now, in this game you fight a lot of bosses as well. It's worth mentioning, you pretty much fight, I think it's between, say, 6 and 7 bosses. Each boss battle is pretty unique, but they aren't that complicated. They're pretty standard things like jump, dodge. Everyone has a very basic attack pattern, very basic strategies you can overcome them. But I don't want to be too critical because the developers have really spent a lot of time creating these different boss battles. Yes, even on the hardest difficulty, they're pretty easy and you can do them in, say, 4 or 5 attempts. But props to them for having this amount of complicated boss battles, or this amount of variety in their boss battles, shall I say. So props to them for that. You pretty much face a boss every 2 to 3 hours through actual gameplay, which does help break up the game. But on a whole, if you can't already tell, I did enjoy the combat much more than the cons I've listed here. Okay, next is some cons. So there is a few cons to this game, and that the biggest con in my opinion is the puzzle system. So how this game works is you unlock, we'll just call them like gadgets, additional equipment that can help you clear other parts of the map. So for example, a grapple hook is a good example. There'll be grapple hook points all throughout all of the levels, and you can't access certain parts of the map until you get grapple hooks. There's also things such as creating portals and being able to hover and do hover jumps and things like that. And this introduces a lot of different puzzle mechanics, and I would like to say the majority of puzzles are really easy. So you can go throughout the game, they'll give you a few puzzles here and there which you can pretty much solve. A couple of times they get the mental brain ticking over a little bit. It's stimulating, it's not bad, but what I will say is there's a big issue with this game is pretty much 16 hours in the game, bear in mind the game isn't too long, pretty much the final stretch of the game, you go to a dungeon, and this dungeon is literally just puzzle central. So it basically goes from being 80 to 90% combat and exploring and 10% puzzling to literally 60 to 70% puzzles, 30 to 40% combat, and I really didn't enjoy this final dungeon. I found it just too tedious. The puzzles were really long, and they weren't necessarily difficult, but it involved a lot of backtracking, so you had to maybe run to one end of a map, which might take you 3 minutes, to have a look at this puzzle, then run to the other side, and it was just so time consuming, and there wasn't enough break. You might spend 15 to 20 minutes doing one puzzle, to then move on to the next bit, and just do a couple minutes of combat, then back to another puzzle. And I think the puzzles is the weakest part of the game, and it's a shame that it really forces the puzzles down your throat for in the last 5 hours you probably spent 3 hours doing puzzles, and it's a bit of a downer. Now I would like to say, guys, Another negative of this game is the sequels, and that sounds really bizarre. You're thinking, how is this a negative? I'm going to be honest, guys, I haven't even played Darksiders 2, 3 or Genesis yet. There's 4 games in this series, but I have spoke to people, and the downside is pretty much Darksiders 2 and 3 are set at the same time or before Darksiders 1, which is a shame because Darksiders sets up, it has such a good ending that it sets up this really, really good sequel, and it's really deflating in my opinion to know that the 3 sequels after this game are all prequels. Play all 4 games in the series and you'd be at the same stage as you are at the end of Darksiders 1, which I think, it's not a criticism of the game, it's a criticism of the developers making a trilogy for whatever reason they've chose to not have them all happen at the same time, which I think is a weird sidestep in terms of story progression. And not only that, there's actually no indication that Darksiders 4 is actually coming, so it might never happen, which means the story may never finish. We'll have to wait and see. Okay guys, so that was my general opinion of the game. If I had to give this game a score, I think I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. It would have been a 9 if it wasn't for the final puzzles. I love this game, and this is the highest score I've given any of my trophy review series games, so I'm going to give this my PlatinumBro seal of approval. This game is really worth a buy to anybody out there who likes a great combat system or enjoys a good RPG, and as well, going further, the Platinum Trophy is very obtainable, which is what we're going to talk about right now. So the Platinum Trophy, how hard is it? Is there DLC? Firstly, there's no DLC, it's just one standard list with a Platinum Trophy. Is it difficult? It's not. It's challenging in terms of there's a hardest difficulty trophy you have to obtain, but on a whole, the hardest difficulty is not challenging at all. I would probably compare this hardest difficulty to a medium for most combat games. In my opinion, a 5 out of 10 is a slight difficulty for most normal casual gamers, and most general gamers of general ability and skill, which is what I class myself as. I wasn't stuck on this game at all. Yeah, I died a couple times on the bosses, but I wouldn't have said a boss took me more than 4 or 5 attempts. Sometimes you may get put in a survival situation with maybe 30 or 40 enemies and it's a few waves, and it can be a little frustrating, but again, I never struggled at any part of the game, so for that reason I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. Now, completion time, this game took me 23 hours to finish, so in a whole I'd say it would take you between 20 and 25 hours. There is a lot of collectibles in this game. You've got to collect all the health upgrades, you've got to collect all the armor pieces, all of the wrath cores, which is basically your secondary stamina bar. You then got to collect as well a lot of the additional items that you can equip to your weapons. So all in all, there's probably about 50 or 60 collectibles, so you will need to play this game alongside a guide. And as well, unfortunately, if you're only going to do this in one playthrough, which you can do if you play on the hardest difficulty, you will have to play the game with a guide, because one of the areas you cannot revisit. So one of the areas has about 10 collectibles in towards the end of the game, and if you do, and it's actually the dungeon with all the puzzles that I was talking about before, so if you don't use a guide, you can't revisit there and you can miss those collectibles, so you do have to play through it with a collectible guide if you're only going to play it once. Now, speaking of missable trophies, is there missable trophies? Yes. Other than collectibles, there's 4 missable trophies. The first one is for destroying 150 enemies with environmental weapons, which is like cars and lampposts and all these things. It's not really missable in terms of anything serious, because in fact you could play the game on easy, and within an hour, if you just did environmental kills, you could have it. So there's 2 ways to do it. You could either play a new game on easy first and just get that trophy. I would probably encourage you to do that way, because on apocalyptic difficulty, on the hardest difficulty, it's actually quite hard to kill enemies with environmental objects because they're so weak compared to your sword. The next missable trophy is for killing more angels than Euthane, one of the giant dwarfs. It's like mid-game, you have basically the number score system where you have to just kill more angels than him. There's also a flying section in the game, only one flying section where you have to kill over 150 or 160 enemies. I did it first time on the hardest difficulty, so it isn't too difficult, but you have to know where it is and just save beforehand just to make sure you get it. And the final missable trophy is just for destroying a helicopter in the first level of the game. And once you know how to throw, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is pick up a car and throw it at the helicopter. It's very easy to hit. I did it in my second or third attempt. And once you've done that, they're pretty much all the missable trophies. And the rest of the game is literally just kill all the bosses, do a few miscellaneous trophies, and then upgrade all your weapons and ride your horse for 100 miles, which can be quite time consuming, but I just tied the bubble to my unlock station, the old classic trophy hunting method, and I unlocked it in about 2 hours. And all in all, the game's pretty fun. The trophy list is really complimentary of the game. And you know when you play a game and you feel like the trophy list just extends the life of the game in a very negative way, where you feel like you just didn't enjoy hunting the trophies? Well, I think that's on the contrary for Darksiders. I really enjoyed the trophies. I found that it complemented the game. Maybe play on the hardest difficulty, which I actually enjoyed probably more than I would have on medium, because it gave me that little bit of challenge. Not too much, but a little bit. And then as well, defeat the bosses, find all the armor pieces. It was pretty much easy going in my opinion, as long as you don't mind a collectible guide. One of the grindy parts of the game is when you have to upgrade all your weapons. My advice to you is that do not worry about your scythe and buy the Harvester, which is the upgraded scythe, as soon as you can, because you have to upgrade your final weapons. So for example, you get a final scythe, you get a scythe and a Harvester, which is a bigger scythe, and you pretty much have to upgrade the Harvester, not the scythe. So don't worry about leveling up the scythe, which is what I did, which actually ended up adding another hour to my entire gameplay. If I knew this already, I think I probably could do this in about 2 hours quicker if I knew what I know now. Okay guys, so that was my Platinum Trophy review of Darksiders Warmastered, an 8.5 out of 10. What a great game, a great way for me to start 2021. I really enjoyed playing this game. If you like RPGs, you like hack and slash games with a good combat system and a good trophy system, then this game is for you. There's a great trophy list in this game, looking at about 20 to 25 hours depending on your skill and how fast you can make it through the guides and the combat additional parts towards the end of the game. Only one playthrough is required. There is 5 missable trophies, but as I've said, none of them are too difficult. You just need to be aware of them. And a difficulty of only 4 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know down below if you've played this game or you plan on playing this game. I'd love to know. And take it easy.